Lost Planet. Originally released in December of 2006 through developer-publisher Capcom, is a game that features a whole lot of monster hunting action, space pirate gunfights, and a big old dramatic as hell story, which all probably sounds pretty good on paper. Alongside other mid-2000s releases such as Mirror's Edge, Resident Evil 5, Prototype, and Dead Space, Lost Planet is one of those early 7th gen titles that always reminded me of just how fucking exciting it could be to witness a brand new console generation take form. And in fact, to be completely honest, I don't think I've ever really felt the same level of intense anticipation for the next PlayStation or Xbox as I did a decade and a half or so ago. I mean, sure, it was always fun seeing the next generation come around, but looking back at my high school years and remembering a young spook goofing off in Dead Rising, or being legitimately unnerved by some of Condemned's best moments, is pure nostalgia for me. And it's for this very same reason that when I picked it up in a Steam sale while fondly recalling the crisp white cover art, I realised I'd never actually completed Lost Planet before, and I couldn't understand why. I remember playing a lot of this game and how much I'd seemingly enjoyed it 15 years ago, but I didn't finish it for some reason. I have a sneaking suspicion it's because it was around this time I got really heavily invested in Oblivion, but I honestly don't know, and I've already rambled on about this way too much anyway.
It's the Grand Champion!
So, yeah, Lost Planet. Having launched in the tail end of 06, just over a year into the 360's lifespan, it's fair to say that considering how young the Xbox 360 was back then and how naturally limited the console's library was as a result, Lost Planet earned a reasonable amount of hype prior to release. With virtually every trailer happily showing off the game's visuals and apparently massive scale, Capcom were clearly aiming to push the next at the time gen powerhouse for as much as it was worth. Although it was also a little unfortunate that around the same time the original Gears of War trailer dropped, which most probably still remember to this day as one of the most recognisable game trailers to date. I can't actually play it for you due to the whole copyright shenanigans, but you might recall that when this fucker dropped, you couldn't walk into a single game or DVD store without hearing Mad World playing every 10 minutes. It was pretty obscene. Still, Lost Planet sold well enough and reviewed decently, most of which complimenting the visuals and the combat while also directing some criticism toward the story and voice acting. There was supposedly going to be a video game movie adaptation with David Hayter of Metal Gear Solid writing the screenplay, but any attempt to actually get the film off the ground had mostly fizzled out by the early 2010s, possibly a symptom of the game's sequel receiving fairly average reviews that called out some awkward design choices and buggy performance. Wait. Hold the fucking phone. This game was released on the BlackBerry store? Oh man, that might explain a few things. So with the franchise already kind of dying out and the third and final game doing a pretty damn good job of hitting the last nail into its half-buried coffin financially, Lost Planet as a whole was left by the wayside as a reasonably exciting series that just didn't fully take off. It was actually later admitted by David Hayter in an interview with IGN that the film was endlessly pushed back due to the studio suffering a financial crash, and with the franchise not really making a profit anymore, it's unsurprising that the project was quietly killed off. But that doesn't mean it's all been completely forgotten. There's still a persisting appreciation for this franchise, in spite of how many hiccups were suffered along the way, so with a thankfully more reliable setup now at my disposal, I figured it would be a good time now to jump back into the world of Lost Planet. And this was where I was going to make a really funny joke about making sure I took a big coat with me so I didn't get cold. You can see why I chose not to. Taking place in the far future, Lost Planet's gameplay and premise centers itself within the inhospitable world of EDN 3, an ice-stricken wasteland made all the more dangerous due to an endless power struggle between the local wildlife, an alien species known as the Acrid, and the scattered remnants of what was once a human colonization effort. The Earth by this point has been lost to man-made disaster and pollution, so to have actually found a shiny brand new planet renders the human efforts a desperate bid for salvation. But, as Starship Troopers has already so effectively pointed out, we don't really do well against giant insects. So now that most of the human population has been reduced to smatterings of military factions still trying to gain a hold of the planet, most of EDN 3's broken, crumbling landscape is bitterly lifeless. A factor that becomes increasingly more apparent as you start to explore the game's earliest chapters, while dodging or killing off Acrid. And if by this point in the video Lost Planet sounds like a reasonably fascinating science fiction premise, then good. But it's in the execution that makes what this game is all about so blatantly obvious. So, on the one hand, Lost Planet is a title that is part third-person monster slayer, with all the futuristic bells and whistles to facilitate a gameplay loop of basically killing Acrid that happens across your path while working towards destroying a larger nest, whereas on the other hand, when battling the human enemies, it's a fairly straightforward third-person action shooter that usually then results in wrecking a military outpost. And for most of Lost Planet's runtime, you'll either be directly dealing with one half of the game structure or the other, both of which ending in some kind of larger boss battle, either being a big scary beastie or a big scary Gundam. Actually, to be honest, it's rare you'll find yourself in a situation where the human enemies and Acrid might be openly killing each other off, with the use of loading screens and closed off level sections resulting in a separation of the two that just feels a little bit too artificial. You'll run into the odd glimpse of it, usually as an introduction to a larger hostile military force, but it's rare to actually witness this big old battle that the game wants you to remember when discovering abandoned equipment or wiped out soldiers strewn across the floor. And that in of itself is kind of frustrating. Right off the bat, we have a really interesting world well worth exploring. The frigid landscape and excellently presented visuals, even for a game knocking on 15 years old, look amazing. Their lonely wanderings past crippled buildings or dilapidated tunnels, it all carries a moody sense of atmosphere that, if actually left to bloom for more than 5 seconds before the explosions kick in, could have actually resulted in a subtly more evocative experience. But this is a Capcom game. A Capcom game released smack bang in the middle of Resident Evil 5 and Dead Rising, which means that the very first cutscene looks like this.
What's that?
10 seconds later.
Eat this! You want some of this? Charge! Damn you sons of bitches! What the?
Yeah, we're not getting much subtlety here. Now, don't get me wrong, I like a lot of what Capcom has had to offer throughout the years and have absolutely nothing against them. Resident Evil and Devil May Cry are both favourite series that I could endlessly revisit, but during this specific point in Capcom's roster, it's clear that the focus was on making every release as bombastic as possible from a gameplay point of view, likely so as to ensure that these were titles pushing the limits of the latest gaming generation. And if you're into that kind of thing, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's pretty much part and parcel AAA gaming, but it does mean that any chance of actually exploring Lost Planet's world is mostly reduced to just obliterating everything in sight with endless hails of bullets and endless explosions. Every chapter is presented in an orderly fashion with extremely linear point A to point B design, and the cutscenes are fucking dumb.
A PDA.
Anything interesting?
Hold on a sec. I just have to break some encryption. It's no good. This will take a while.
Nevek.
Yuri.
Oh, it's nothing.
That is such bullshit!
So, to actually dig into the game's action from a structural point of view, most of your time dealing with the Acrid will be dodging and weaving past larger species while focusing on hitting the thermal weak spots with everything you've got, be it a machine gun, shotgun, rocket launcher, sniper rifle, the usual. And to be honest, most of the weapons afforded to you are pretty standard fare. You do get around to using a couple that are slightly more futuristic, but compared to the older projectile-based firearms, these feel sluggish and seem to lack impact. When it comes to it, you'll get through most enemies just fine with the machine gun, seeing as it's probably the most well-rounded of the bunch when taking distance and accuracy into consideration. The shotgun sounds awesome and does pack a decent punch up close, but against larger Acrid you're better off keeping your distance to avoid damage. Whereas while the sniper rifle dispatches human enemies with hilarious ease, the opportunity to actually use it against Acrid is so absent from the beastie hunting part of the game that I honestly forgot it existed at times. I'm not kidding though, if you're against human enemies, once you have the sniper rifle, it's basically a joke.
Double kill. Multi-kill. Rampage. Unstoppable. Godlike.
It also doesn't help that the game's standard difficulty is ridiculously tame. You can breeze through most of Lost Planet at a stupidly comfortable pace, with the thermal collection mechanic mostly existing to gently nudge the player forward instead of being a crucial element to survival, which by assumption is what it was meant to be. Most of the fail states that came my way were either due to getting knocked off a ledge or accidentally falling off something, or getting crushed to death via an insta-kill when a boss steamrollers you into absolute oblivion. Aside from that, the normal difficulty as a whole might as well be labelled easy, or even casual. And I'm really sorry if that makes me sound like the kind of gamer douchebag who swears by the hardest difficulty and nothing else. I actually really hate saying stuff like this because of that exact reason. But come on, just look at this fucking guy.
Fire! Fire!
Or how about this massive nest of Acrid? Looks like it should be in trouble, right? But no, just gonna plow through with about the same amount of resistance as mowing the lawn. Play this game on hard. It's more satisfying experience, the action feels more intense and engaging, the risk of failure is somewhat more heightened, and as a result, getting through particularly hectic sections of the game is a lot more fun. Really, the only true merit I can offer the normal difficulty is that it definitely feels like the more theatrical experience, which might sound weird, so let me explain. You'll have no doubt noticed in some of the previous footage a key element to Lost Planet's gameplay that I've not touched on yet. And that would be the various available mech suits that you can either scavenge or steal. And when it comes to absolutely slam dunking Acrid or human enemies with little resistance, these are the icing on the cake. For starters, the mechs are excellently designed for fun, creative gameplay. Different suits offer different approaches, be it speed, limited flight, heightened damage resistance, or even the ability to transform into a vehicle. And to offer even more opportunity for player creativity, the weapons fitted on either side of the mech suits can be detached or swapped out at will. Don't fancy twin miniguns? Fuck it, grab a couple of rocket launchers or mix and match with a grenade launcher or something else. The world is your frozen oyster, and there are a lot of these things scattered around. It's easily one of the most refined, well thought out elements to Lost Planet's repertoire. Boss battles while controlling a mech suit is about as close to Pacific Rim the game as you're going to get for a mid-2000s title. The stomping, almost sluggish movement feels weighty, and although it might frustrate you initially that these things don't maneuver with more grace, you do get used to it. The whirring components or sparking electronics keep things visually interesting, and hell, even just the simple matter of getting in one of these can be surprisingly well animated.
Ready.
It's so subtle, but seeing the thrusters literally push the suit to its feet instead of the mech just clipping upright is wonderfully satisfying, and it's little touches like these alongside battling enemies that feeds back into that theatrical experience I was talking about. It looks fantastic to wreck boss monsters and beasties or mech suits and military grunts. And make no mistake, Lost Planet is doing everything it possibly can to sell you the epic triumphant narrative with spectacular visuals and seemingly insurmountable odds. But if the chance of death is so desperately minuscule, it ends up just feeling shallow and lifeless. When upping the ante to include even more chance of death through the harder difficulty, Lost Planet stops fucking around and actually starts to act like the hellish snow planet it seems to want to be. Crouching and rolling around to avoid gunfire plays a more pivotal role from a strategic point of view, whereas the ability to grappling hook to slightly higher points of the level is suddenly more heavily relied upon when you're on the hunt for sources of thermal or ammo refills. And as for the boss battles, to say that these are more intense is something of an understatement. Even the very first acrid boss of the game is immediately kicked into a higher gear. You suffer far more damage, and lose mech suits at a faster rate as a result. You need to think about your next action and be more careful when executing it, instead of just standing around blasting the enemy weak points while making only token efforts to dodge incoming attacks. And look, if it sounds like I'm focusing way too much on this, and I should be talking about some other shit like side missions and stuff, well, I'm sorry to tell you that aside from looking around for collectible medals, this is literally the whole point of Lost Planet. There are no side missions, no additional objectives, no level-to-level upgrades like health, damage, or ammo capacity, no chances to explore additional sections of the map, no real continuity from one level to the next. Nothing. You kill things. And that is all. So you might as well make the most of it, because if you think that the game's plot is going to do you any favours, oh boy, I'm sorry to tell you that you would be very, very wrong. Alright, so it was at this point that I was going to lead into my usual spoiler section that pops up now and again, but you know what? No, I'm not doing it here, because while attempting to write the section of script explaining it, I realised that not only do I utterly despise the story of Lost Planet, even attempting to talk about it in any great deal is fucking exhausting. Here is a snippet of the critical reception section of the game's wiki page. A common complaint was Lost Planet's story. It was described as confusing, convoluted, and poorly translated. Yeah, that pretty much covers it, I'm sorry. The plot of this game is often so goddamn torturous and such an incoherent mess at times that by the wondrous moment I had finally finished playing it, I felt like I'd allowed my brain to be teaspoon lobotomized. I wish I liked this game story. I really truly do. But if I actually try to fully explore it, I'm gonna self-destruct into a ball of misshapen rubber bands. The characters are so exhausting and barely act human, let alone retaining any believable personalities. The big bad evil plan is stupid, as is the character design of one of the most prominent antagonists. Look at this. What is this? And Wayne. Fucking Wayne. The main character, Wayne Holden, it's like cosplaying a brick. His personality is borderline non-existent. His special advantage discovered throughout the game is contrived at very best, otherwise it's just irritating and beyond. Also, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to the other Waynes of the world, but I got real tired of this guy's name really quickly. Seriously, the way love interest Luca pronounces his name in the most whiny, nail-biting, ear-piercing intonations possible.
Wayne! 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 Wayne!
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep harping on, but it's been a long fucking time since I felt so uncontrollably infuriated with the game's story. In fact, here is a very brief dissection of an early cutscene. Minor spoilers, beware.
Wayne!
Yeah.
Yuri,
Yuri's things! They're gone!
What? Where could he have gone?
Okay, so first off, she was literally running towards you to tell you about Yuri going missing. So why is she now surprised that he's gone missing?
Fool!
Do you know something? Wayne, where's Yuri?
Don't know.
Liar!
So Wayne can't lie for shit. I've known children to possess greater deceptive range than this human pancake. And also, why is she scolding him as if he's a child? I'm sorry. Come again? What? Jesus fucking Christ. This is literally the entire game's cutscene structure. The dialogue is stilted as fuck, the mannerisms are just plain weird at times, the exposition is clunky and horrible, and Wayne sulks around like a moody teenager. Case bloody dismissed, Capcom. Case dismissed. Well now. If I'm honest, I expected to come out of the other end of this review with a somewhat more positive bee in my bonnet. But for the most part, Lost Planet ended up proving a far more frustrating experience than I expected, and in truth it's mostly for dumb reasons. The action of this game is very enjoyable when presented in the most appropriate light, that being a level of difficulty that actually allows the combat system to fucking breathe. The mech and kaiju Acrid designs are fun and present plenty of entertainment. Especially the one that straight up steals the sandworm design from Dune.
The sleeper has awakened!
And hell, mundane though it may seem, even the explosions are constantly surprising with how goddamn good they feel. And actually, to touch on the sound design, an element of the game I've hardly spoken about this time around, it's mostly serviceable. The main theme is probably the best thing on here. I couldn't honestly recall any of the game's soundtrack from my playthrough, so I then went back and listened to a whole bunch of it on YouTube, and then I looked through the comments and immediately felt bad because everyone was praising the shit out of this game, and all I could think was of how much I'm now ripping into it. I didn't mean to, okay? I remembered having a lot more fun with this game.
Liar!
Alright. Final word. Lost Planet is a mixed bag with some excellent examples of design, visuals, and game mechanics, particularly in reference to the mech suits. However, it suffers far too much from a story that feels nonsensical at the worst times, and a confusingly tame difficulty that should have presented a far greater challenge without simply forcing the player to select hard or extreme. I might revisit the franchise with a trip into Lost Planet 2 or maybe even 3 someday. But for now, I'm all waned out.
I even went so far as dressing like a complete idiot.